we've got a specialized history of the early church. It starts where? What city? Jerusalem. And that takes us at least through the first 7 chapters. The narrative kind of increases in chapter 8 with Philip going to the city of Samaria. And those transition chapters where the gospel has been primarily saturating Jerusalem and the Jews to going to the Gentiles in every place. So 8 through 12 we have that. Then 13 through the end primarily is more of a biography of Paul's life, but a narrative of the work increasing toward the nations of the earth. So 13 and 14 we have Paul, Barnabas, John Mark leaving Antioch, going to Cyprus, and then up into, just a nutshell, Galatia, southern Galatia, Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. Second journey, well, chapter 15, we have the conference in Jerusalem over whether or not Gentiles had to be circumcised to be saved. And then Paul wanted to revisit those places where he had been. And so Barnabas wanted to take John Mark. Paul thought it not wise. So Paul chooses Silas, who had been a prophet there in Jerusalem, a Jew. And Barnabas takes John Mark, they sail to Cyprus. Paul and Silas then go up through Syria and Cilicia. They come to Lystra and pick up Timothy. Good. Then they go on over, would have gone northward into Bithynia and Asia, but the Spirit forbade them, so they came eventually to Troas, picked up Luke. Good. And then they would set a straight course through Samothracia, came to Philippi, and we have the conversions of where we really are. I've been studying at Pleasant Road on our auditorium classes, conversions of the 2 houses. Who are they? Lydia and the jailer. All right. Then in 17 we have the work in Thessalonica, Berea, and Athens. In 18 we have primarily the work in Corinth. And Paul spends how long there? A year and a half. Okay, so he leaves Corinth with Aquila and Priscilla. They go to Cenchrea, across to Ephesus, and then Aquila and Priscilla remain there. Paul goes on back to Caesarea, salutes the church in Jerusalem, and then in 1823 he comes to back up to Antioch, or 1823 is the beginning of the 3rd journey. And so we have him coming in chapter 19 over to Ephesus, and he finds at Ephesus 12 men who had been baptized how? Under John's baptism. And so keep in mind that when you're talking to people who think that just, baptism is just kind of an outward sign of an inward washing, and it really doesn't matter much about it, just go to Acts 19, where it's very significant as to how into what are you baptized? What's the purpose behind your baptism? All right, so he's there in Acts 19 in Ephesus, and we have the writing likely of Galatians, and then over to the your west on your thinking and your mouth of Corinth, 1 Corinthians. And he goes, he's real concerned about how things are going. And so he goes up to Troas, and he's looking for who? Starts with a T. Titus, and he doesn't find him. And so then he goes over into Macedonia, and that's where Titus comes to him and brings him the report about how the Corinthians are doing. They had done fairly well. However, there have been some new developments, new problems. Some are criticizing Paul. Some are denying his apostolic office. So from Macedonia, he writes the 2nd letter that we've been studying. And it's really a defense of what? His apostleship. He starts off, we pointed out primarily here we go, the 3 major sections, the defense of Paul's ministry and his co-workers. And then the 2nd major section is in 8 and 9, where he encourages the collection that they had already begun to be continued. And then in 10 through 13, he comes down to himself, more so than just his co-workers, but himself and his own apostleship against his detractors. Now, back to where we are. in chapter 1, he begins after the salutation with the God of all comfort. And yet, Paul needed it, and a lot of others, all of us need comfort. But he defended himself against being fickle. They said, well, he's changed his travel plans. And we find out in the early part of 2, in the latter part of 1, that the reason he did that was to give them time to repent. And so his integrity along his travel plans, then the forgiveness of the man who had his father's wife, and then the triumph of Paul's gospel, or the gospel of Christ in the latter part of 2. And then in 3, the glorious nature of the new covenant. Really, his apostolic office was a glorious work because of the nature of the new covenant that he preached, and the hardship and glory of his ministry, that he looked forward to, though his outward man was decaying, his inward man was renewed. And this ministry involved reconciliation, chapter 5. And this reconciliation calls for separation, which is where we are now. We ended up last week talking primarily at the end of 5 about the ministry of reconciliation. If you pick up with me, just 5:20, we are ambassadors, we talked about that word, on behalf of Christ, as though God were entreating by us. We beseech you on behalf of Christ, be ye reconciled to God. Him who knew no sin, he made to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. We become righteous when we are forgiven, when we obey the gospel. And so, some of your translations may show the connection of verse 1, that it's not even out of the paragraph. And working together with him, that is with God, we entreat also that ye receive not the grace of God in vain. And that continues down really to verse 2, and verse 3 kind of picks up another idea. So we are ambassadors. We preach we are a part of the ministry of reconciliation, which we preach the word of reconciliation, and it's like we're working together with God to bring you to God. And so you ought to appreciate that. God has extended his hand to us, and you need to reciprocate by turning back to him. So that's where we are in our study. Now, in chapter 6, which is where we are now, this idea of reconciliation, to be reunited. Everybody knows what reconciliation means. To reunite, concilio, there to make favorable. Here we've been estranged by what separates us from God? Sin. And here through the ministry of reconciliation, the word of reconciliation, as Paul was an ambassador preaching all these good things, that the purpose is to reunite, to reconcile us to God. So, if we are reconciled, though, it calls, if we're separated because of sin, then if we're reunited with God, that means what does our relation become relative to sin? We're separated from it. And so Paul connects what he had just stated concerning their work reconciling people to God to a warning not to receive God's grace in vain. Now, God's done all this. We are ambassadors. We've been preaching that. Now, don't let it go to waste. Don't let that happen. And that's developed especially in 14 and 18. Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath light with darkness, and Christ with Belial, and so on. So come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. That's really a key. If you notice that in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14, 15, what concord hath Christ with Belial? What portion hath a believer with an unbeliever? What agreement hath the temple of God without? Here you're looking at opposites. Don't flirt with all of this. For we are a temple of the living God, even as God said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, be their God, and they shall be my people. Typical covenant language. Wherefore come ye out from among them, be ye separate, saith the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. All of those are Old Testament passages that really dealt with idolatry. And he says, get away from all of that. And then in 7:1, I know we're getting ahead of the cart before the horse. In 7:1, having therefore these promises. What promises? The fact that God will be your God and you can be his people. Having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. So we grow, perfecting, looking to an end, perfecting holiness, separateness in the fear of God. All right, so that's kind of where we're going in this 6th chapter. Comment, question, anybody? All right, back on my chart here. Before, though, when he says that he does not want the grace of God to be in vain on their behalf, before that he sees the need to reestablish his character and influence and his authority among them in order to give weight to his warning and prove his qualifications as an ambassador, which is really in verses 3 through 13. So here's kind of a note, or an outline rather, and if you have our booklet on that, you can kind of follow along those lines. Let's read. Let's just read 6:1 through 3. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Lottie, if you would. Chapter 6, 2 Corinthians 1 and 2.
And working together with him, we also urge you not to receive the grace of God in vain. For he says, at the acceptable time I listened to you, and on the day of salvation I helped you. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation.
All right. It's interesting how Paul uses an Old Testament passage here. Paul's talking about his approved nature. As ambassadors, they were co-workers with God, and they should be careful not to receive God's grace in vain. Verse 1. Before we go on with that, it's so tempting, and I want to do that for a moment. To receive God's grace in vain. We all know of people who have been given all kinds of privileges and based on love for that person and given perhaps money and things, maybe paying for their school, and all of a sudden you've showered down with all of that grace, and then they don't use it. They don't use it, or they squander it. How does it make you feel as maybe a parent, grandparent, or just an observer of others? How do you feel toward what did those people do?
It's almost like a slap in the face.
It is, Linda. It's like a slap in the face. They wasted it. They squandered it. And that really bothers me when I see people who, there have been others, there was a couple of them, I mentioned them to some of you up in Athens, who would pay for a whole year of education in the Bible school for some young people. The family might not have had the ability to pay the tuition, and they just out of their love for the people, and they could do it financially. And I think, how did those young people do? How did they treat that? How did they treat the environment, to treat the teaching? And I think, and I know it's true with many of you, that I have had so many blessings with being hearing uninspired preachers that I thought the world of, and I still do. And I thought years ago, that's kind of what got me into this idea of trying to teach people, that I've had some opportunities a lot of people haven't had. What am I doing with them? Am I taking what I've been taught and then turning around and trying to teach others, or not? We don't want it to be said for any of us that the grace of God was wasted on our lives. You know where I'm coming from. I look back and think, man, I squandered that opportunity. I didn't take advantage of that like I should have and I could have. And I just want to use the rest of our lives as well as we possibly can. remember the little quote? Is it Whitson, Janet, that y'all have? This is the beginning of a new day. God has given me this day to use as I will. I can waste it or use it for good. However, what I do this day is important because I'm exchanging a day of my life for it. That's full. Isn't that full? That what we do today, we're exchanging a day of our... Tomorrow, we say, well, I spent my whole day doing this. Was it worth it in the grand scheme of things? When tomorrow comes, this day will be gone forever, leaving in its place something I have exchanged for it. I want it to be good, not evil, success, not failure, that I shall not regret the price that I paid for it. To me, that's really powerful. That we want to use the blessings that God has given us to the fullest extent possible, and take the ball, so to speak, and run with it. And the very fact that all of us are here this morning, I think, is indicative of the fact that you want to do that. You want to take it and do the best you can with what we have to work with. Comment or question? Van, you look like you're thinking. Karen, anything? Janet? It helps me when I think, I've had, when I get out and drive, I think, maybe that's bad, I just start thinking about the past and thinking about people in my past. And I think, man, I have been so blessed. I have just been so blessed to have people who loved me and I didn't even know it. Didn't appreciate it at the time. And wanted the best for me. What am I going to do with that? What am I going to do? And that applies in all kinds of areas. I've thought about classes that people teach sometimes and ideas from comments that people make that are so helpful. And comments that you make that are so helpful. And I think, boy, I wish so-and-so heard it. And so-and-so did. And it's kind of wasted on them. But we just want to do the very best. Janice, you look like you might have wanted anything. Randy, anything? Okay, well, enough on that. So Paul stops here in part and says, look, all we're trying to do is bring you to God, reconcile you to God with the ministry of reconciliation, the word of reconciliation. And now he says, please don't, I entreat you, working together with him. We're co-workers with God, in other words, verse 1. We entreat also that you receive not the grace of God in vain. Then he uses this passage from Isaiah 49, verse 8. For he saith, that is, God says, at an acceptable time I hearkened unto thee, and in the day of salvation did I succor thee, or give you aid. Behold, now is the acceptable time, now is the day of salvation. I'd like for us to just take just a moment. Where is that passage found that he quotes? Isaiah 49, verse 8. I'd like for us to turn back to Isaiah 49 just for a moment. Latter part of Isaiah deals with primarily Babylon coming and taking Judah captive in the Babylonian captivity. But the latter part of Isaiah, really chapters 40 on, deal more with a number of the messianic promises. And in chapter 49, it's a very interesting chapter, the Messiah speaks actually through this. God does, as well as the Messiah. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, ye peoples from afar. Jehovah hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name, and made my mouth like a sharp sword, the shadow of his hand, and so on. Down in verse 3, he said unto me, Thou art my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Now here the Lord speaks. This would be the Messiah, Christ. But I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for naught, and vanity. Yet surely the justice due to me is with Jehovah, and my recompense with my God. In other words, the Messiah seems like that maybe my work has been in what? In vain. But now saith Jehovah that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him, to reconcile, and that Israel be gathered unto him, for I am honorable in the eyes of the Lord, my God has become my strength. Yea, he saith, It is too light a thing that thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth. Well, that's quoted in Acts 13. In other words, God is saying to the Son, you will be a light to the Gentiles, and you will bring them back to me. Verse 7, thus saith the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to him whom man despises, to him whom the nation abhors, to a servant of rulers, kings shall see and arise, princes, and they shall worship, because of Jehovah that is faithful, even the Holy One of Israel, who had chosen thee. And here's our verse. Thus saith the Lord, or Jehovah, in an acceptable time have I answered thee, and in a day of salvation have I helped thee. And I will preserve thee and give thee for a covenant of the people to raise up the land, to make them inherit the desolate heritages, saying to them that are bound, go forth. To them that are in darkness, show yourselves. And they shall feed in the ways, and on the bare height shall be their pasture. Now, real quickly, here is the picture of Judah. It's going to go into captivity. They will return. But then catapulting all the way down to the Messiah's age, he pictures the Messiah, as it were, thinking that the work he had done might be in vain among some people. But God says, no, I will make it, I will work it out. In verses 7 and 8, 6, 7, and 8, the Gentiles will hear. And so, in verse 8, in an acceptable time have I answered thee. When the time is right, then Christ would come and die. That's reminiscent of Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time. You know, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman. So in an acceptable time have I answered thee, and in a day of salvation have I helped thee. This is the Father speaking to the Son, to the Messiah. That in the right time, everything is going to work out fine. I will help you. I will preserve thee and give thee for a covenant of the people. All right, that's enough on that. Do you get the picture? Does that make sense? And so, prophetically, God is speaking to the Messiah and saying, at an acceptable time, everything is going to work out okay. I will come to thee. I will aid thee or succor thee. Now, let's look. In 2 Corinthians 6, he starts off by, after he says, you know, we've been involved in this ministry of reconciliation. Well, that's what Isaiah was speaking of bringing the people closer to God. He says, I don't want it to be in what for you? In vain. And then he uses the passage there in verse 8, at an acceptable time I hearkened unto thee, and in the day of salvation did I succor thee. Well, guess what? Had that time come? That the Lord? Yes, the time had come. So now Paul makes the application. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. Christ has already come. God has aided him through his work. And now everything that was involved in bringing people as well as Gentiles to God, that's mentioned there in Isaiah 49, he says it's available. So don't let the grace of God be in vain on your part. Now is the time for you to make things right. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that follow? So now, you don't let time go. Don't let opportunities be squandered. You need to come back to God. So here, somebody made the point last week. I don't remember if it was Martin or Van. Somebody made the point that he's writing, obviously, to Christians, but he's saying you Christians need to be what? Reconciled to God. Showing, of course, the possibility of apostasy. That's one thing. But they need to come back around. And don't listen to these false apostles and so on. Does that make sense to everybody? Isn't that rich? Oh, I tell you what, the older I get and the more I put in context these passages, I see all kinds of relationships or connectors that I hadn't thought about beforehand. And it just makes it so rich. study, and it enriches our faith, really, I think. So, in 3 through 13, where are we here? In 3 through 13, well, here's my note. Paul quotes from Isaiah 4 and applies it to now. God had chosen his own time for accomplishing his will through the Messiah. However, Christ had already come and died for everyone's sins, enabling us to be reconciled. Therefore, the special time had arrived. While Paul and his companions were busily preaching the word of reconciliation, Corinthians needed to be reconciled now, before it became too late for them. Paul did not want God's grace to be in vain as it related to them. So Paul connects what he just stated concerning their work with a warning to receive not God's grace in vain, which is developed in 14 through 18. However, before that, he sees the need to reestablish his character, his influence, and his authority. So we have the nature of Paul's ministry and what he's been willing to undergo. Comment, I've done doing all the talking, and I apologize for that. But
Back in Isaiah, and you said, did you say in verses 7 through 8, that's God talking to Jesus?
yes, yeah,
I don't understand that.
yeah.
Did Jesus not know all this?
No, I don't believe that. It's I think mostly for the reader's benefit.
Okay.
Yeah, and there would be an element in which it would seem as if his work had been in vain.
Right.
There certainly was truth in that, but I have thought about in Psalm 2 when he says, "The Lord said unto my Lord," no, that's 110. Why do the Gentiles rage and the peoples imagine vain things? The kings of the earth. You've got David speaking, and then you have God speaking, and then you have Christ speaking, and all three personalities in that one psalm. And so you have, I take it here, that the Father, obviously he's speaking through Isaiah, but there's a communication back and forth that he wants Judah to understand. That this will be the nature of his work. It will be rejected of some, and they will not be reconciled. And God's grace would indeed be in vain, but overall it would not be. Okay, so let's go back to chapter 6, verse 3. I'm sorry.
I don't, correct me if I'm off track, but when God developed the plan of salvation at the beginning, Jesus would know about it, and at some point he had to agree to it.
Oh yeah,
to come.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what maybe a recap here, but for the people of Isaiah's day, there it's revealed to them what's coming.
Yes. And throughout Isaiah, in fact, in that 49th chapter, the Messiah is pictured as the servant of the Lord. In fact, throughout Isaiah, he's a servant. Where did I see this earlier? He was a servant of kings, and yet he would be over kings. That's in verse 7. Yeah. Thus saith the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel and his Holy One, to him whom man despises, to him whom the nation abhors, to a servant of rulers. To a servant of rulers. That would be Christ. In a sense, that's descriptive of his humanity, coming to earth and serving. King shall see and arise. He's still God with us, but in his humanity, he became a servant, in all of that. It's some of the richest parts of Isaiah right there, I think. Okay, good point. Anybody else? All right, let's go back to 2 Corinthians 6. Let's read 3 down through, if I can find 2 Corinthians, 3 through 10. And you'll notice in all of this that Paul deals with, it's very similar to what we'll see later, how some were viewing him and how things actually were. Beginning in verse 3, Robin, if you would, 3 through 10, please.
giving no cause for offense in anything, so that the ministry will not be discredited, but in everything commending ourselves as servants of God, in much endurance, in afflictions, in hardships, in distresses, in beatings, in imprisonments, in tumults, in labors, in sleeplessness, in hunger, in purity, in knowledge, in patience, in kindness, in the Holy Spirit, in genuine love, in the word of truth, in the power of God, by the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and the left, by glory and dishonor, by evil report and good report, regarded as deceivers and yet true, as unknown yet well known, as dying yet behold we live, as punished yet not put to death, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing yet possessing all things.
Yes, there's some contrast to go back and forth. And I take that to be, how he was viewed by some of those false apostles and false brethren at Corinth to how things actually were. It's interesting, in the beginning of verse 3, giving no occasion of stumbling in anything, that our ministration be not blamed. And that's connected, obviously, to what just went before. He says, I don't want you to receive the grace of God in vain. Now is the acceptable time. And now is the day of salvation. Now is the time for you to reconcile to God and really be reconciled to me. And so in order for you to have a basis on which you can believe that, I'm going to tell you some things about me, Paul says. Let me read to you from the NIV. I don't hold grief for that, but I read from it sometimes. We put no stumbling block in anyone's path, so that our ministry will not be discredited. Verse 4, rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, in great endurance, in troubles, hardships, distresses, beatings, imprisonments, riots, hard work, sleepless nights, hunger, purity, understanding, patience, kindness, in the Holy Spirit, in sincere love, truthful speech, and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and in the left. Now, stop right there. So far, he's just been telling about things that he has undergone in order to do what? Bring the gospel to them, in order to help them to be reconciled. But then notice the contrast now in the beginning in 8. Through glory and dishonor. Bad report and good report. Genuine, yet regarded as impostors. Known, yet regarded as unknown. That is, I'm known by some. Others say, well, he's nobody. Who's Paul? Well, he's genuine. No, he's really an imposter. Dying almost to the point of death, and yet we live on. God had spared him. Beaten, and yet not killed. Sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. Poor, yet making many rich. Having nothing, and yet possessing everything. Do you see the contrast? We don't have anything material blessings, but we have everything spiritually. And so there's bad reports, good reports. There's honor, there's dishonor. Depends on who you listen to. Is that true with people today? Depends on who you listen to. Paul, it's almost like Paul is saying the caricature that they have painted of me, it's a completely different person. I'm not that person. I don't know if any of you have had brethren or somebody else to say something about you that, well, who are they talking about? It's not me. That's not me. They've got somebody else in mind. No, they're talking about you. Well, that's not a picture of me. That's not how I think. That's not my MO. None of that applies to me. Have y'all ever had that done to you? Sure, yeah. Most all of us have. And you think, why did they come up with that? Well, that's a different story. It could be jealousy, it could be hatred, it could be a number of things. But that's not the real you. That's not a picture of you. And Paul is saying, well, we've done all of these things, and it's a positive from about verse 3 down to verse 7. Hunger, sleepless nights, purity, understanding, kindness, in the Holy Spirit, and sincere love. All those things are positive. But then the contrast begins in verse 8. Through glory and dishonor, bad report, good report, genuine and prosperous, known, unknown, dying, live, beaten. And so it's obvious that he's taking the what had been said about him and contrasting to that, to how it is, in order that you might know who I am, that you'll come, that you have your heart, well, as he says in verses 11 and 12, I think that, 11, 12, and 13. Let's keep reading, and we'll come back. Van, if you would, 11 through 13. I think he points all that out to show I'm just a printed page here. I am transparent. You can see exactly who I am, and that's who I want you to be toward us. Okay, Van, 11 through 13.
O Corinthians, we have spoken openly to you. Our heart is wide open. You are not restricted by us, but you are restricted by your own affections. Now, in return for the same, I speak as children, you also be open.
Yes. In other words, I haven't just been so open and above board with you. Please be the same with us. And there's an honesty, a genuineness about Paul's work here. You remember when we first started 2 Corinthians, I mentioned to you that there is more of the heart of Paul in 2 Corinthians than about any other book. You can see that, it just really disturbed him. Why they were, some people had influenced others, poisoned their minds, we sometimes say, against Paul. And they're painting a picture that's a caricature that's not really who he was. And he said, I've not been that way. I've been open with you. Please be that way toward me. And so he's begging them to do that, and he gives them all these reasons to so do.
Some people still think of Paul in the wrong way, think he was a male chauvinist and things like that, so they still think.
That's right, yeah. They had no clue that Paul was an inspired apostle. All right, we've got a question or two on page 60 of our booklets here, down in verse, number 16. His work concerning reconciling people to God by the gospel should not be received how? In vain. And then the word of reconciliation Paul preached called for Christians to be separated from the world. 14 through 7. We're not to be what? Unequally yoked together with unbelievers, but rather cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Let's spend a moment on that. Let's move on and read all of those verses. Verse 14 through 7, verse 1. Linda, if you would. 14 of 6 through first verse of 7.
Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with
Belial.
Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God.
All right, thank you. You'll notice in these passages, if your Bible has some parallel passages or references to the Old Testament, to some of these passages, because he quotes extensively from the Old Testament. What are some of the passages you may see in your marginal readings? Janet, what do you see?
I have 4 written in here: Leviticus 26:12.
Okay.
Exodus 29:45. Ezekiel 37:27. And Jeremiah 31:1.
Yes, those are the same ones I've got. You looking at your?
From you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, those are what's in the American Standard, and then he comes back in verse 17. Come ye out and be ye separate from them, and where's that from?
Numbers. Is that
Isaiah.
That's,
Isaiah 52:11.
yes, Isaiah 52:11. And then, I will be to you a father, and ye shall be to me sons and daughters. That's verse 18. And we see that in several places. That is that's covenant language. I will be your God, and you will be my people. I will be to you a father, ye shall be to me sons and daughters. That language that is used oftentimes in Exodus, some in Leviticus, primarily though in the prophets. Hosea, you remember Hosea was told to go marry a woman of whoredom, and her name was Gomer, you remember? And even the children that she had would be not my people. And then later, my people. Ami and Ben-Ami. So you've got the idea of you're separate, but now reconciliation brings you together. So God is your God, you are his people. There's that togetherness again that he's talking about. So, what could separate that togetherness? Sin. Yeah. Sin. Any kind. So, don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And that brings us to this. Let's see, I talked about that. Here we go. This involves a connection with an unbeliever, which is such that the believer is controlled by the unbeliever. The yoke is what is considered what? Be not unequal. Not just yoked, but an unequal yoke. It's similar to Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11, likely has its background in that passage. Following the warning, Paul shows how spiritually right living cannot share in wrong actions or sin. And he raises 5 rhetorical questions indicating that they were not distancing themselves sufficiently from the pagan and unbelieving neighbors. Language tends to indicate idolatrous practices were primarily in view, though not limited to that. Earlier, he warned them about eating in an idol's temple. That's back in 1 Corinthians 8. And in unbelievers' homes where meat was offered in sacrifice to idols, and you say you're just going right along with it. Don't do that, he says in chapter 10. And by such becoming partakers in their idolatry. The idea unequally yoked is from this Greek word here. Heteros. That homogeneous means the what? The same. Heteros means opposite. And so it's yoked with something that's opposite or different yoke, to have fellowship with one who is not an equal. I had a lesson that I preached, a couple of years ago on Matthew 11. Coming to me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, all you, take my yoke upon you. And I talked about being yoked to Christ. And I had this slide that I wanted to go through because of the term yoked. Be not unequally yoked with unbelievers. This word, another of a different sort, and zugus, the yoke, coupling two things together with unbelievers. Thayer says it means to come under an unequal yoke or to have fellowship with one who is not an equal. I think that's significant to it. Something that basically you are under the control of another. It makes it an unequal yoke. Some ask about marriage. Well, I think it would depend on the mate. I think it could very well be that a person it could be married to somebody and it's not equal. He or she does not have opportunity to do what he or she needs to do in the service of the Lord. And I think it could be, but I don't think that's necessarily the point of emphasis there. It could be work. It depends on the demands of the work. If I'm involved with a company and it's calling on me to do something that's unscriptural, maybe to lie, to doctor the books in accounting. Lee and I knew of a fellow who was an elder in a congregation that we were a part of. He worked for the government. The government basically, or at least people over it, asked him to basically doctor some documents, change them. And he said, I can't do that. He was fired. He was rehired in another place. But if a person determines he's going to work in some area. Now, I'll give you an example. I'll come on down here. Let's say a person has great athletic ability, and he wants to play baseball, for instance. And maybe he's a tremendous pitcher, and he has opportunity to go up through college and the minor leagues, and he goes to the major leagues. There are going to be 7-8 months of the year that he's not going to make it to Lord's Day services. And if he wants to do that, then he's not going to be able to do it. Then he's unequally yoked. There's not an equal share there. There's a fellow who used to, when I was teaching in school, I would ask ninth graders, what do you see yourself doing in 10 years from now? And one fellow was a pretty good fiddle player. And he wanted to be in Nashville and recording in studios for various artists. And I told him, I said, just know that if you do that, then you're going to be on the label with some people, and the lyrics I don't think you're going to appreciate. You're going to be backing up lyrics. I try to get people to think what I think that's an application of it. You don't want to be condoning and supporting something that is evil in the very nature of it. Military service, when you can't go to services, you can't do what, and then being asked to do things that really a Christian ought not to do. What about the Lord's Day? So my point is that there are a lot of applications of this passage. But the main idea is that I am in a relationship that is unequal. And I can't serve the Lord properly and maintain this relationship. That's the unequal yoke. Not just yoked, but unequal yoke. Is that any comment or question on it? Yes, sir.
You know, that word yoked together and unequally yoked, it's kind of lost on us today.
Yeah.
We wouldn't ever use that term. But once, and I don't know where, but God told them, don't yoke an oxen and a donkey.
Yeah, it's Deuteronomy 22, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is the ox would overpower the donkey, and
Yeah.
you couldn't get straight.
That's right.
You won't be able to go straight.
Yeah.
You'll go where that oxen leads.
Yes.
And if you apply that to us, that all those examples you gave just fits.
Exactly. We just have to be careful. That's all the more reason to teach our young people, especially, get in an area of life where you can serve the Lord faithfully, and you won't have some questions. There will always be some questions, but that's a tremendous idea. Be not unequally yoked, not just yoked, but again, the unequal part of it is, I think, really what gets on that. Okay. So, what did I have? Something else. It's interesting that scriptures Paul quotes concerning Israel's coming out from among them had to do with Judah leaving Babylonian captivity. Levites were not to touch any unclean thing associated with that idolatrous country that might defile either them or the sacred vessels they carried. Again, a reference to idolatrous practices. And I quoted from Garvey on this. In the first epistle, the apostle had reasoned with the church, giving it instruction as to marriage ties between pagans and believers, and as to social and other fellowships which tempted the Corinthians to take part in idol feasts. And all this, his language had been careful and guarded, and he had recognized to the full every principle of Christian liberty involved in these questions. He now lays aside the argumentative reserve which characterized his first letter and tells them plainly that by thus going to the extreme limits of their liberty, they are liable to make the grace of God in vain as to them. That life is a brief day of probation, wherein they should not hazard their salvation. Then by a series of short, terse questions, he shows the utter folly, the inconsistency, and incongruity of every form of alliance which entangles the children of God with the children of the devil. The world has not so improved, and Satan has not so repented as to any way nullify or even weaken the weight and applicability of this apostolic warning. And then, this is in my booklet. sometimes Christians will use verse 14 as a text to teach that Christians should not marry non-Christians. And as I mentioned on that other slide, I think it could occur, but I don't think necessarily it's carte blanche. It could possibly apply in some circumstances where a party to a marriage was completely and physically dependent upon the other, and the yoke was indeed unequal, making it difficult or impossible to carry out certain requirements for Christians, such as assembling and giving and doing those things. That does not seem to be the context or the point of emphasis in 2 Corinthians 6. 1 Corinthians 7 indicates that some Christians were married to non-Christians, and the teaching there is for them not to divorce. Their marriages were acceptable to God. It's difficult to see how it's wrong for one to enter a relation which the Lord says is right. Therefore, whatever the application is in 2 Corinthians 6, they were to come out from among them, which is very opposite of what Paul taught in Corinthians when he actually addressed the subject in 1 Corinthians 7. Further, the surrounding context does not discuss marriage, but idolatry. And the 5 rhetorical questions revolve around idolatrous issues. While it's certainly wise to marry one who will help and not hinder one or his or her way to heaven, 2 Corinthians 6 does not seem to be a passage that addresses the subject. Rather, it's a warning concerning compromises and too close associations with unbelievers to the point that the yoke is unequal in favor of the unbeliever. That's the best I can do on that passage, but it's been raised numerous times when I was younger. I'd hear that passage relative to Christians marrying non-Christians, and I've tried to answer it. That's about as good as I can do on that. Somebody had a hand up, but yes,
Didn't
sir.
back when I was young, if I remember correctly, and I could be totally wrong, but it seemed like I remember if somebody was a non-Catholic that married a Catholic, they had to sign that that their children would be raised as Catholics.
Yes.
That would be an example.
That would be an unequal yoke. That's a great example, Van. And yes, I have read that very thing. That I don't think they do it now.
I don't either.
But it basically the sign you'll agree if you are married by this priest that you'll allow the children, and that's basically signing away your rights to rear them as New Testament Christians.
I'm so glad you put all that, because I've recently had talked with relatives and different people. Some people think it's a sin
Yeah.
to marry a non-Christian. And a person that I was talking with, he said, well, it could have been Van. Well, he was the first I was talking to. I guess later on he said, well, if it's a sin, what do you do to get out of it?
Exactly.
You can't divorce.
That's the point I made. And even the passage says, wherefore come ye out from among them and be ye separate. But Paul said in 1 Corinthians 7, if you're married to an unbeliever and they're content, stay in it. But then in verses 15, he says, if the unbeliever departed, let him depart, you're not under bondage. That is, you don't need to salvage your marriage and destroy your Christianity at that expense.
Is that note in your Corinthians?
Yeah. This quote is straight from my booklet here. Yeah. Okay. But you say all that, and then I still come back and say, you have married the closest physical relationship on earth. You don't want to marry somebody who's maybe even just been baptized. You want to marry somebody that will help you go to heaven. Help you go to heaven. And not just somebody just got wet, and all of us know people like that. They were baptized, but they're members of the church in name only. But you want somebody to help you. If we can get that across to young people, or marriageable age.
Barney Keith said that to Van asked him about marrying, a non-believer one time, and he said, I think it's more important to marry somebody that wants to go to heaven.
Yeah, a faithful Christian.
Right, and so it's not the same necessarily.
No. I have thought about some older preachers that I've known, and they're like Van and Linda told me, Brother Moore would not marry them because Van was not a Christian at the time. And a lot of preachers just wouldn't do it because of the questions, and then they're advising against it. And how can you go along with something you're against, And if we can somehow get our young people to think down the road that I want to marry somebody who's going to help me in services, not hinder me. If I have children, if it's a believing woman and an unbelieving husband, then he'll help me with the children and take me and help me dress them. I mean, there's so many practical aspects of rearing children in the Lord that you need help. And you sure don't need anybody to discourage you. And anyway, that's...
I know in my own life, my mother asked her why she married my daddy. And she said, well, all I ever heard was marry a Christian, marry a Christian.
Yeah.
He was a Christian in name, you know, and that didn't work out, you know.
Yeah.
Then Van wasn't a Christian, but he's helping me get to heaven, you know, now. So
Yeah.
he's somebody that wants to go to heaven. My daddy, who had been a Christian, was a fallen away Christian, or he became one.
Yeah.
You know, so but I see the sense in teaching your children to marry a Christian.
Yeah.
If they're what they should be,
So-
that's a good thing.
somebody who's faithful, or at least it looks like they're inclined to that.
Right.
I've got a whole bunch of patience with people who are learning and who seem interested, and I would be more for, you know, a marriage on that line. It looks like that was the case with my dad. He was coming to services with my mother. He just didn't know. He was just ignorant. But once he started learning, he latched onto it. And it, versus a person who's rebelling against it. I think that's bad. That's bad when that happens. And hopefully people will always turn around. That's the hope. But you have to work with what's going on now.
And this reconciliation that you was talking about previously, that has to come from us. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So he doesn't have to be reconciled to us. We have to be reconciled to him.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's probably a good time, real good time for us to start. Well, we got through 6. What's the main point of chapter 6? Reconciliation demands that we separate. We separate. 5 deals with the ministry of reconciliation, and then the glorious ministry he was involved in 4, and the new covenant, the glories of the new covenant in 3. So we'll try to work these ideas back as we can to review. All right. No other comment, Janet? Anything? Randy, if you would, please.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beautiful day, for the time and opportunity to be gathered to open our Bibles to study from your word. We thank you for your word. We pray that you give us wisdom